What if the man who would lead the greatest military operation in human history walked into a room carrying a number so devastating that it could have stopped everything before a single soldier ever set foot on the beach? If this kind of story moves you, the kind where history turns on a single conversation, a single number, a single decision made under impossible pressure, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves real history. And drop a comment below telling us something you didn't know before watching. Let's begin. It was the spring of 1944, and the weight of the free world rested on the shoulders of two men who, in a quiet room somewhere in England, spoke about something no military briefing was ever supposed to say out loud: the acceptable price of victory measured in human lives. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, had been studying the intelligence reports, the coastal fortifications, the weather windows, and the sheer mechanical horror of what Operation Overlord demanded. The Germans had spent years constructing the Atlantic Wall, a fortress of concrete, steel, landmines, and artillery stretching from Norway to the Spanish border, and the beaches of Normandy were among the most lethal corridors on Earth. Eisenhower's planners had run the numbers over and over again, and the conclusion was always the same: to breach those beaches, to push through the hedgerows, to establish a beachhead large enough to sustain an invasion force. It could cost 50,000 American lives in the first wave alone. 50,000. Not in a campaign. Not in a month. On the first day. The man Eisenhower brought this estimate to was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, a man who had led his country through the Great Depression and was now steering it through the most destructive conflict in human history. By early 1944, Roosevelt was already in physical decline, his polio-ravaged body bearing the additional strain of 12 years in the presidency. But his mind remained sharp, his political instincts undiminished, and his moral clarity formidable. He had been to Casablanca in January 1943, had met with Churchill at Tehran in November of that year, and had already committed the United States to the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. There was no retreat from that promise. When Eisenhower presented him with the estimate of 50,000 potential casualties, Roosevelt did not flinch in the way a lesser man might. He did not immediately reach for reassurance or demand that the number be revised downward to something more politically comfortable. Instead, according to those present and the historical record that followed, Roosevelt asked Eisenhower something that cut straight to the heart of everything. Was there any other way? And Eisenhower's answer, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who had studied every alternative, was no. The planning for Operation Overlord had begun in earnest in 1943 under British Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan, who served as Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander before Eisenhower officially took over in January 1944. Morgan's team, working under the code name Cossack, had identified Normandy as the optimal landing zone, far enough from the heavily fortified Pas-de-Calais to offer some element of surprise, but still within range of Allied air cover from bases in southern England. The beaches had been given code names that would become immortal: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Each one represented a different national contingent, a different tactical challenge, and a different human cost. Omaha Beach was already understood by military planners to be the most dangerous of all, a killing ground where the natural geography favored the defender almost completely. The bluffs overlooking the beach gave German positions a nearly perfect field of fire. There was no cover. There was no mercy built into the landscape. And the men who would be sent there on the morning of June 6 would have to cross open sand under withering fire and somehow climb. Eisenhower had taken command of SHAF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, on February 13, 1944, and immediately began pushing for a larger invasion force than Morgan had originally planned. Where Cossack had envisioned 3 divisions landing by sea, Eisenhower and his ground commander, British General Bernard Montgomery, expanded the assault to 5 divisions across a broader front. This decision was not made lightly. More divisions meant more landing craft, more air support, more logistical complexity, and crucially more time. Every week of delay gave the Germans additional time to reinforce, to move panzer divisions closer to the coast, to seed the beaches with more of the steel obstacles and mines that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group E, was obsessively installing. Rommel believed, correctly, that if the Allies could be stopped on the beaches in the first 24 hours, the invasion would fail. He called that window, the first day, the longest day. He understood what was at stake, and so did Eisenhower. The deception operation running alongside the invasion planning was one of the most elaborate in military history. Operation Bodyguard and its centerpiece Operation Fortitude created an entirely fictional army group, the 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton, the commander the Germans most feared and therefore most believed capable of leading the real invasion. Thousands of fake radio transmissions, inflatable tanks, and carefully placed double agents fed the German high command a consistent lie. The real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. Hitler himself was so convinced of this that even after the landings at Normandy began on June 6th, he hesitated to release his reserve panzer divisions, believing Normandy was a feint. That hesitation, born of a masterfully constructed deception, may have saved the invasion. But none of a deception could eliminate the fundamental reality of what those men on the beaches would face. If you are watching this and finding yourself gripped by the courage and consequence of this story, please subscribe to this channel right now. Give this video a like, share it with a friend or family member who deserves to know what these men faced, and leave us a comment below telling us what part of this story surprised you the most. Your engagement means everything to this channel and helps stories like this reach more people. On the night of June 5, 1944, Eisenhower visited the men of the 101st Airborne Division at Greenham Common Airfield in England. These paratroopers, young Americans, many of them teenagers, would be among the first to go, dropping behind enemy lines in the darkness before the beach landings began. Eisenhower walked among them with his hands in his pockets, asking their names, where they were from, what they did before the war. He smiled. He joked. He shook hands, and when the last aircraft disappeared into the night sky, he turned to his driver, Case Summersby, and she saw that his eyes were wet. He had told his aide earlier that he expected to lose a significant portion of those paratroopers. He had written a note, a message to be released in the event of failure, accepting full personal responsibility for the decision to launch. That note sat in his pocket as he watched the planes go. It read, "Our landings in the Cherbourg Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." When dawn broke on June 6, 1944, the English Channel held the largest armada ever assembled in human history. Nearly 7,000 ships carrying more than 156,000 Allied troops. The air above them was filled with more than 11,000 aircraft. The operation involved soldiers, sailors, and airmen from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Poland, Norway, Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, the Netherlands, Czechoslovakia, and Greece. It was the concentrated military will of the free world, pointed at 5 strips of sand on the coast of occupied France. At Omaha Beach, the carnage began almost immediately. The amphibious tanks that were supposed to provide cover for the infantry sank in the rough seas before reaching shore. The bombers that were supposed to crater the German defenses missed their targets entirely, their bombs falling miles inland. The first waves of soldiers from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions came ashore into a hailstorm of machine gun fire, artillery, and mortar rounds. Men died before they reached the waterline. Men drowned under the weight of their equipment. Men bled out on the sand as the tide came in around them. By midday on June 6th, the situation at Omaha Beach had become so catastrophic that General Omar Bradley, commanding the American ground forces from his command ship USS Augusta, seriously considered abandoning the beach entirely and redirecting follow-up forces to Utah Beach, where the landings had gone far more smoothly. It was one of the most agonizing command decisions of the entire war. But then, slowly, impossibly, something changed. Small groups of men, led by junior officers and sergeants, and sometimes by no one at all, by sheer human refusal to accept death without resistance, began to find their way up the bluffs. Colonel George Taylor of the 1st Infantry Division reportedly told his men the words that have since defined that moment. Two kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now, let's get the hell out of here. And they went. By nightfall on June 6th, the Allies had landed approximately 156,000 troops. The cost was enormous. Estimates of Allied casualties on D-Day range from 10,000 to more than 12,000, with the dead numbering somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000. The 50,000 figure Eisenhower had warned Roosevelt about had not materialized on that single day, though the campaign that followed would last nearly 3 months and claim hundreds of thousands of lives before Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944. Roosevelt never publicly revealed the details of his conversation with Eisenhower about the casualty estimates. He carried the burden of that knowledge through the summer of 1944, watching the reports come in, watching the numbers grow, knowing that he had said yes, that he had looked at the possibility of 50,000 dead Americans, and said that the cause demanded it. On April 12, 1945, just 27 days before Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, the day known as Victory in Europe Day, Franklin Roosevelt died at Warm Springs, Georgia, of a cerebral hemorrhage. He did not live to see the victory he had committed so many lives to secure. Eisenhower went on to accept Germany's surrender, to command NATO, and eventually to serve 2 terms as the 34th President of the United States. In his farewell address in January 1961, it was Eisenhower, the former Supreme Commander, the man who had once carried a note of personal failure in his pocket, who warned the American people about the dangers of the military-industrial complex. The general who had planned the greatest invasion in history spent his final years cautioning against the seduction of war. What does it mean to say yes to a war that may cost 50,000 lives in a single day? What kind of weight does a leader carry when they look into that number and choose to proceed anyway? The answer, history suggests, is not certainty, it is conviction. Roosevelt and Eisenhower were not men without doubt. They were men who chose to act despite it, because the alternative, a Europe permanently subjugated under the ideology of National Socialism, was a darkness too total to accept. The soldiers who crossed those beaches, who climbed those bluffs, who jumped into the night over Normandy, did not do so because they were unafraid. They did so because they were willing, and that willingness, multiplied by 156,000 on a single morning, changed the course of human history. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real about the price of freedom and the weight of leadership, then please subscribe to this channel right now, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear what these men carried, and leave a comment below telling us what you learned today that you didn't know before. History remembers the battles. We want to remember the people inside them.